this shirt, this hair, we vlog. Quite honestly, I don't really know how this vlog will go. Although, to be fair, that's how I feel about most videos. Currently reading How to Survive a Plague by David France, which I'll talk about more later. And I'm about 40 pages into Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. Today, I'm at work. I tried something new in my hair this morning and I'm not sure I like what it did. Well, there's currently loads of traffic lights, so I got here a bit earlier. And I still ended up stuck in a really long queue of traffic that took me quarter of an hour to get down one road. Here till 5. We'll see how the traffic is getting home. Then I don't know what I'll do. Maybe read. Maybe finally write. That'd be a good idea, wouldn't it? To actually try and get some of this writing done would be a great idea indeed. Well, we'll see. I make no promises. On my walk around Macclesfield Forest this morning, I recognised that that was how I envisaged the beginnings of a perfect day. I chose to do a bit of a trek that really gets the lungs going and the heart going, and when you've reached the top to the viewpoint where these benches are, it was nice to experience the silence, and my body just enters into this moment of calm that I greatly appreciate and would never have expected when I was younger. I came home, I had a cup of tea, and now many hours later I still haven't done anything, yet I don't feel like I haven't achieved anything, which is nice. I have been reading How to Survive a Plague by David France and Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. However, yesterday at work, I chose to save a book from the bin, and that book is The Picturegoers by David Lodge. I've heard of the author before and never heard of this book, but reading the back, it sounds similar in tone to the Muriel Sparks that I have been enjoying. This book was originally released in 1960, and I think that it is set at a cinema. All of the people who go in one evening, it traverses throughout their lives and tells a complete story. This was David Lodge's first novel, and I think that's a really interesting way to go about things and an interesting way of framing a novel. Indeed, it is something I have previously considered doing with a similar thing where you take a setting where people who don't know each other are thrust together and then go out from that and explore their lives from outside of the situation they're currently in. But the only way I've ever thought about doing it was within a television series or a radio series, and that never felt like it could work. So I'm interested to see how it works in the novel form, because I feel like there are many things outside of this setting where their lives could have interwoven without them even knowing it, and that I find interesting. So I am planning on throwing out my current reading of this to read this incredibly quickly. It is only 240 pages, so I'm hoping to finish this before Friday. I feel in the mood. I don't dislike these two books, but I just feel in the mood to read something that I hope will relax me, that feels as though it is going to appeal to that part of me that feels some nostalgia for an era in which I never lived, and also inspire me as a writer. And so I am going to disappear now, do a bit of reading of The Picturegoers by David Lodge. I'll see thee Buena City. Cinema was a kind of low-voltage brothel for half its customers and an ice cream parlour with entertainment for the other half. It took us 75 pages to get to that description of the cinema, and I felt like it captured it incredibly well. I feel like it's a great look at the changing lives of people post-war. We, again, see characters that we often see perpetuated in British fiction, television and film of the time. So we have this character of Mark, who is the lodger of the man and wife we see introduced in the beginning of the novel. He has entered into a relationship with their daughter Claire, but there is another man who is vying for her attention called Damien. We have the vicar in here who's going to the cinema hoping to see a Blue movie, but he's arrived on the wrong night. You have the other children of the man and wife from the beginning of this book whose names I have forgotten. Boy just wants to stay in the cinema, and ever since he found out that he can just sit and watch films as long as he's paid his money, just stays and watches the film over and over again. I think that it captures a moment in time really well. There has just been a discussion by this character called Mark, who is a writer who can't get his stories accepted, and I wondered whether this was the novelist himself coming through to explain his own frustrations with the publishing world, because when this book came out, the author was relatively young himself. He was 25. I do think that this has the typical signs of a first novel that I talk about nowadays, which is a lot of ideas, but I think that the medium in which he's done it, as having the theatre, the cinema, being the setting, means that he can explore all these different ideas and plot points, and it seems fitting. Now, I do have some issues with the way women's bodies are discussed in the novel, but the way it's done is to emphasise the malevolence of a certain character who views women as objects and wants to do them harm. You have Claire, who is the daughter of the Mallorys, who in the beginning of the novel is upset because she has to go to school and she has to educate herself. At the same time, she has to do all of the housework, and her brother hasn't had to do that. And she wants to make something of herself just as much as her brother does, but he is given the time to do so. And if she doesn't do everything around the house, she is called lazy. And I like that this sexism is being addressed in the novel, but also the way that religion has caused all of these societal views as well, and the way that certain people have broken away from religion. Now, it seems to be a trend this year for me to find books that are showing people struggling with religion. I had guessed that I was going in for that when on the back it talked about Father Kipling being a scandalised priest, but it's only after looking it up that I discovered that the author himself struggled with Catholicism. And so this book heavily talks about that, as do other books written by the author, and the way it impacted the lives of Catholics. But there is some great writing in here, some very insightful writing. I'm most appreciative of that. I do think there are some stereotypes, and I think that the author does rely on these stereotypes at times in order to tell his story. but I can understand that because of the age of the writer when this novel was written. It's very much like a soap opera, is the way that I can talk about this, in that you have all these different characters meeting up in the one place and you have them having various struggles. You have the Mallorys, where the wife is hiding the fact that she has a lump on her breast. You have Claire, who was going to become a nun but has chosen not to become a nun, and now she wants to make something of her life, but she's feeling the pressure of her family to settle down and become a housewife. You have Mark, who wants to become a writer but feels that he's going to keep getting rejection. I think that if we were going to look at this as something purely sociological of the time, we could do that. As we know, I failed sociology, but there was a particular section where I was reading and I thought, this really does give me an impression not just of the writer, but the way things were viewed at the time. It's gone into the way women are viewed, and the film that they're watching goes into that very specific thing about what women's measurements ought to be, what the ideal measurements are. And this woman is getting naked on screen of this film that they're all going and watching. And when we enter into the women's heads, which is where I had this problem, was when they're watching this film and this woman has taken off her clothes, and the women in the audience are, some of them are thinking about how will they ever compete with that, and some of them are thinking about, well, they're calling her some derogatory words. And then you have the male gaze who are sat next to their wives and will now spend their entire time disappointed, so they shouldn't show films like that because it's going to make them disappointed. And then you have that whole thing of why women shouldn't dress a certain way because of the way it will make men react. That did detract from the novel, but I do wonder whether it's in there so that the author can criticise those thoughts. Either way, my plan is to continue reading today, and then I will hopefully finish this before Friday. On the plus side, I located the hat that I thought Sally had stolen. I have finished reading The Picturegoers by David Lodge, and I am quite happy to have saved this book out of a bin. This book is written in 3 parts. The first part is set in the October of one year and takes place on a Saturday night, Sunday morning. The second part is set during the summer of the following year, and then the third part is set sometime after that. Each part deals with a pivotal moment in the storyline of each of these characters that is presented in the first part. This book does an excellent job of putting a microscope on religious families and the way that religion can change people, as well as the way that it can also help some people to find some sort of solace. Yesterday I said that Claire was the child of the Mallorys who wanted to go off and make something of her life. I was incorrect. That is indeed Patricia. Claire wants to enter into a relationship with Mark, who is something of a dreamer. He also wants to make something of his life by becoming a writer, but his works keep getting rejected. I don't deny that this does everything I say first novels do, which is that they include a lot of ideas, and it doesn't really have much in terms of natural story progression. We see these pivotal moments and we have to fill in the blanks ourselves, although Lodge does show us some vignettes of what's gone on in the last few months for this character to end up at the point they're at. The ending, or the endings, as I should say, as there are different endings for each character, are a bit rose-tinted, but I expected that and were somewhat cinematic. If we think about film and Hollywood endings, then I think that characters definitely got Hollywood endings. Some of them felt like damp squibs of endings. It still felt like the characters were going to go on and do things with their lives. It wasn't a final underlining, I never want to revisit these characters. I would have been very grateful if there was a sequel to see where these characters had gone and what they had gone up to. I went back and read the introduction. I didn't do that beforehand because oftentimes with introductions I found that they spoil the actual contents of the book. The introduction here was written by the author, And this edition came out 32 years after the book was first published. And the author admitted that the reason he hadn't allowed it to be published in so long is because he felt reticent to do so because the book was his first book written and was before he had properly figured out how he wanted to write and how to write correctly. He recognises the issues within his prose, but he doesn't change anything apart from a few typos, he says. And I liked getting to see this author be aware of how they have advanced in their career. Still, I think that for someone to have started writing this book when they were 21 and to finish it when they were 25, I think that David Lodge was quite perceptive, and I am interested to go and read more of his books to see how his writing improved over the years. I know that he ended up getting shortlisted for the Booker twice, and his writing with future books won awards. I began to notice this parallel between the cinema and the church, and the way people were attending church was likened to attending the cinema. And I like that Lodge addressed this in the introduction as people were noticing this. Something else that I noticed was Father Francis Kipling shares a name, Francis, with the father in Chocolat by Joanne Harris. I'm always making these connections here. And in Chocolat, the vicar, the priest, is trying to stop people from going to the chocolate shop during Lent because it's unchristian. Here, the priest decides that he's going to try and get his parishioners his congregation to stop attending church on a Thursday, and he's going to move the service to Saturday evening to try and stop people from going to the cinema and to get them to go to church. Naturally, you can imagine how that works out for him. I liked the examination of young relationships. I do believe that Lodge did actually include himself in the novel with the character of Mark in some way. I think that Lodge is also here trying to figure out his own thoughts towards Catholicism and the way that it has interfered in life and how religion is changing to suit people. And I think that Lodge had a lot of questions here as to the importance of religion in other people's lives, and so he is trying to use this novel to answer his own questions. Another thing that the author does is that I mentioned being uncomfortable with the use of a certain word to describe black characters within the narrative. I also disliked the treatment of the few black characters that are referenced within the novel. Lodge does discuss this in the introduction. Lodge says he wrote this book from the age of 21, so that's 1956, and it was released in 1960. I'm aware of the racism that was within Britain at the time. I think it's good that it's mentioned because it isn't avoiding the topic of race at the time or racism. It was very prevalent. We had sitcoms with racist language. We had racist sitcoms back in the day. And so it would have been difficult to avoid. It is the way that Lodge explains the use of the word that I don't particularly agree with. But I know that we see it in Christie and we see it within other literature of the time. I think that for an author's first book, for a book by a young man that came out when he was in his 20s and was published because his publishers were looking for books by angry young men, that it does really well. As a post-war novel as well, then it's great because, again, it's a moment in time. And to put it alongside the other post-war novels I've read this year, it's a different side because we aren't dealing with supreme after effects. The world has changed somewhat by this point. It has been it's been over a decade since the end of the war when this book is set, and attitudes have changed. And I like that that is addressed. As the author rightly says himself in the introduction, it does give us a sense of the way people lived at the time and their attitudes. And I think if you're looking for a novel to see what Britain was like, London in particular, 61 years ago, then this is cross-generational. It has people from different social classes in here. And it gives you an idea of the changing attitudes, the way things have changed since the war, the way the world was pre-war, during the war, and now, the way that women's roles have changed, and the way that religion is not at the forefront of people's minds or lives. I think this is a good book at documenting all that. Like I say, rather glad to have saved this one from the bin. This has been a vlog about a book that I saw was being thrown out. I happened to think looked interesting. It ended up stealing my attention for a few days. I look forward to rereading it. I look forward to going and rediscovering some of Lodge's other works, and it certainly raised quite a few questions. If you've read this book and would like to discuss it, then please feel free to do so in the comments. After watching this video, do you think that this is a book you would like to read? Let me know that as well. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.